when I talk about myself, what is myself? What is myself? Because when I look within, there are parts of me that want to just like please the world. And then there are parts of me that just want to please myself. There are parts of me that want to be very impulsively, sort of engaged in, just the seduction of the moment, whatever it is that, just pulls my senses, towards gratification and engagement. And that can be beautiful. Life is beautiful when that is done within appropriate measures. And at the same time, there's a part of me that wants to live a very healthy life and a virtuous life and all of that. And so a first step towards self-awareness to me is recognizing that I have within me multiple selves.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season includes 25 incredible episodes devoted to the inner development goals. Based on the science of personal transformation, the IDG framework represents 23 skills needed for today's world. And of course, empathy is one of them. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Dr. Hitendra Wadhwa, author of Inner Mastery, Outer Impact, How Your 5 Core Energies Hold the Key to Success. It's an incredible book that bridges ancient wisdom with modern leadership insights. As a lifelong student of the world's mystical traditions, Hitendra is on a mission to uncover, codify, and teach the universal laws of success in life and leadership. He serves as a professor at Columbia Business School, where his teaching on personal leadership and success has earned him the prestigious Dean's Award for Teaching Excellence. And beyond the classroom, Hitendra is the founder of the Mentora Institute, where he empowers individuals and organizations with a scientific and values-based path to achieving both material and spiritual success. The Institute helps accelerate performance, build thriving workplace cultures, and develop exemplary leaders. Hitendra's impressive career also includes a tenure at McKinsey & Company as a strategy consultant and a journey into entrepreneurship as the founder and CEO of a Silicon Valley startup by the name of Paramark. He holds an MBA and PhD in management science from MIT's Sloan School of Management and graduated with an honors in mathematics from St. Stephen's College in Delhi. I've invited Hitendra to join this special IDG series because his work exemplifies the self-awareness trait of the Inner Development Goals framework, and I want to welcome Hitendra to the show.
Thank you, Anita. It's a great joy to be here with you and to be of service to, our common exploration of, such beautiful themes that your work is about. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited there's so much. Let me just gush a little bit. I've loved this book and I want to recommend it to everybody listening and watching to pick up a copy of Inner Mastery and Outer Impact. It's the, how can I put it? There's so many pages that remind you of something that you already know intuitively and that you've already maybe even read about, learned about, invested in. And yet there's also so many novel, sublime ways and personal ways that you bring this work to life. So I just want to commend you on the book. I loved reading it. As you can tell, there's lots of little notes in the margins. And I'm going to dig into the book, and I'm going to also ask questions related to the topic of self-awareness and how your work relates to that. But I want to maybe ask about your backstory first, because you went from math to management consultant, entrepreneurship to teaching, and I wonder if there's any thread or backstory that you'd like to highlight to our listeners and viewers that would explain why you're so passionate about the work you're doing.
Wow. Yeah, no, thank you. And that's just very gracious of you. I so appreciate the way you just talked about what really in some ways is kind of a life work. I mean, I remember when I finished writing the book and had sent it over to the publisher with the final T crossed and everything. And I just kind of happened to have a walk with my wife that day, and I was telling her, I think I can die in peace. I think I can die in peace. Because I just felt a little sense of completeness. This is a work 15 years in the making. I first started teaching a class at Columbia Business School on personal leadership and success, which was the catalyst for what led to a lot of research and formulation and testing and refinement and a generation of stories that I was able to get from my students in the class over the years, and so finally it culminated into this book, so which I'm very grateful for. But to your question, the story, I guess its roots are really even going back a lot more. When I was growing up, I think from pretty much the earliest memories I have of having a curious and thinking mind, at least at the latest by the time I was 10 or so, I was just very drawn to what is life about? And it was so unsatisfying to see how it all came to an end and that we would all die one day. And I was like just not able to accept that. My spirit within felt timeless and felt immortal, and also the constraints of space. Why is that star, so distant that I'm told that I can't talk to it? Why can't I talk to it? It seems very personal and connected to me. Why are these people supposed to be more dear to me and my loved ones because they're my family apparently, and those people are not my family? They're not my dear one, just as an accident of birth. So these things used to just really consume me from inside. And the peace of mind that I ultimately was able to get to in my teens around this was by accessing the teachings of modern day mystics, those who had studied the deep truth-seeking traditions, in history, and pursued some of that in their own lives, experiments, practices, consciousness elevating, routines, and then come out with, a set of ideas and thoughts in an accessible language for me, which was English, around some of these deep, again, timeless profundities. What happens at death? What happens beyond death? How can you fully expand into your highest potential? All of that. And I was also drawn to, academia and my school and everything. And so when I started to get to be a college going age, I was very drawn to looking at philosophy, looking at psychology. And those disciplines were being treated from a very Western lens, because education, even in India at that time, which is where I was growing up, has been very much shaped by the modern Western model. And what I was finding is that it was a little bit not satisfying for me. It was a little dry, and this philosophy at times was very intellectual. The psychology was a little bit too focused on the dark states of the human mind, psychology of evil and depression and schizophrenia. I was more interested in the psychology of, love and ecstasy and bliss and greatness. And so I didn't end up majoring in philosophy. I didn't end up majoring in psychology. I did have a love for math too. Math to me was a portal into, again, just like timeless truths, very, very clear, black and white view of what's right and what's wrong, in some universal way. It doesn't matter which culture you're in, 2 + 2 will always be 4, and that questing for like the essential axioms of life, because that's what you do in math. You distill things down to the core building blocks, and then you combine them logically, and then everything emerges from there. So I was very fond of that, the pattern recognition. There was a sense of beauty almost I could get in mathematical spaces. So anyway, so math was also in some ways feeding the same kind of mystical urges, in me, but through that language of mathematics. And then I went on to business and things. But by the time I hit my early to mid 30s, it just became this all-consuming fire, to want to reconcile all these different parts of me, and not to sort of like split them up into different tracks, where there's an inner track where I'm pursuing all these deeper truths, and there's an outer where I'm kind of trying to just show up in the world and conform to the lanes that the world has, kind of defined, like thou shalt be a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, or thou shalt be a professor, or thou shalt be a consultant, or whatever. I was floating across these, but, nothing was truly satisfying me. And I'm so grateful. I'm just so grateful to the modern age. The last 20 years, psychology has really opened itself up to more of a, deeper investment in humanism and really thinking about sort of our our more positive practices. You're so invested in them yourself, whether it's empathy or optimism and all of that. And also a school like Columbia just was very very experimental and open to having me move from teaching marketing and strategy to going into this experimental class I wanted to create in personal leadership. And I'm grateful to the students for having leaned into it without any past track record of me doing this kind of stuff. And now it's 15 years into the making, and there is some more credentials and validation and stuff out there, so it's easier now to enter these spaces and engage audiences. And I'm so much more educated as well about how to build that bridge between the inner and the outer. So anyway, so I'm deeply grateful to Columbia and to the modern times that has allowed this fusion to come together.
Wow. And what strikes me as you're speaking is that you had along the way lots of self-awareness about your place in the world and asking those big questions and discovering where your contribution could be optimized. I wonder if you could be an inner compass whisperer to somebody who's listening and maybe hasn't paid attention to the inner voice, what you might say to nudge them.
Yeah. Wow, that's a beautiful, beautiful question. There's a chapter in my book called Ways of Knowing, and it invites us to recognize that there are these hard and beautiful questions that we should not shy away from wanting to pursue some clarity on. What is my highest potential? What is my inner core? What is life? Why am I here? How do I get to be, the happiest I can ever be? How can I be the most loving I can ever be? Could humanity tomorrow be at a place where everybody's, almost perfect in the way they engage and behave? These are big, bold, and beautiful questions, and there's no reason why we should be shy from exploring these. But how do you explore these? And the traditional ways we've done it is through scientific evidence and experiments and scientific theories that get validated or invalidated over time, et cetera. So there's science, and then also we have our faith traditions, and so we lean on faith. It can be cultural precepts that you picked up through your family or community. It could be the great scripture of your of your religion. And also beyond science and faith, there is experience. We learn through experience. We do certain things and we see what kind of outcomes it generates for us and all of that. So experience, guides us as well. And then what I offer is that, yes, but that's only half the story, because there's outer science, outer faith, and outer experience, but there's also inner science and inner faith and inner experience. And so when you were just talking about, a whisper of the inner compass, that's where I want to invite people to pay a little bit of heed to for a moment, which is, what are your inner, experiences like? Inner experiences are when, a friend of yours says something, let's say very contemptuous, about some individual or some community. And from the outside, you're playing along, because you just want to conform. But from the inside, you just, in that moment, you just felt a little bit of like discomfort. Like, that's not how I would have said it. That's not the tone in which I would have said it. There's something here that doesn't really like fit my values. And pay attention to that. It might be fleeting. And so oftentimes we have these fleeting signals from inside, and we don't pay enough attention to them and give them their due. And so we keep going through life without fully learning what every experience, when we intuitively respond to it from inside, is meant to teach us. So that's one thing. Just recognize and honor the stirrings that happen within you. That's the inner experience part. The inner science part to me is, conduct some experiments in how you live your inner life. If you react in a certain way to a situation, and if it's not working out very well for you, maybe there's a different way to react to that. And if you do that, like, what does that lead to in terms of behaviors, experiences, responses from your side? And by conducting experiments like this, you might reject, certain ideas and thoughts, but you might accept others because they're like, wow, like this actually ended up making me so much more effective at building a bridge and resolving that conflict, or at being able to navigate through a very uncertain and painful period from the outside, but with grace and gumption from the inside in my capacity to withstand that. So conduct these inner experiments, and then the third and final is the inner faith aspect. So there's outer faith, like what you might hear as a sermon, in the church, and then inner faith is what your own inner voice is telling you, and the best and only way I know to kind of tune into that is to create that space inside, to create that space inside. And we create that space when we just pull back from any attachments, we pull back from our ego, we pull back from any emotions and insecurities and fears or anything. And then we create this very receptive space within, where, as Yogananda, Eastern mystic from India who came to the United States and was striving to create like a integrative interfaith world order of sort of universal truths. He once said it beautifully. He said, when you become silent, then your inner voice breaks its silence. He used the word God for it, God as a loving creative force in the universe. But when you become silent, then it breaks its silence. And that's, that to me is the ultimate security to have in life. The capacity to enter the space of calmness, pull back from the ego and attachments, and be there to listen to it. And have that faith that everything at that point that comes to you is in not just your best interest, but also in the best interest of every cause and every commitment and everything you're meant to manifest, in the universe.
Right. So the whisperer is saying there's only upside. There's only upside to this for not only yourself, but everyone. That's beautiful. So the IDG framework actually defines self-awareness as the ability to be in reflective contact with our own thoughts, feelings, and desires, and having a realistic self-image and ability to regulate oneself. So I just wanted to ask you if that resonates with you and if you'd like to comment on it, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I love this initiative, to define these goals not just in outer terms but in inner terms. So kudos, to IDG and all who are promoting and embracing that. I think I find that very resonant, the definition and the idea of self-awareness, as you've said. The only thing that I could perhaps contribute as a idea to consider is that we have not spent enough time in pausing to understand and define even the term self. And yes, I mean, there are some beautiful philosophies around that, both in the East and the West. By the way, when I was sharing that I was finding some of the Western philosophy a little dry, it was only because of the sampling that I was doing over time since I have had the opportunity to kind of look at a broader swath of the Western philosophy domain. And I've also discovered some beautiful interconnection between Eastern mystics and teachings and Western philosophers, and in the 16, 17, 18, 1900s, some of that through the help of my daughter, who's actually investing in doing research, on those cross flows, on those cross currents. So there are some very beautiful, Western philosophies I picked up over time as well. But coming back to self-awareness, this notion of when I talk about myself, what is myself? What is myself? Because when I look within, there are parts of me that want to just like please the world. And then there are parts of me that just want to please myself. There are parts of me that want to be very impulsively, sort of engaged in, just the seduction of the moment, whatever it is that, just pulls my senses, towards gratification and engagement. And that can be beautiful. Life is beautiful when that is done within appropriate measures. And at the same time, there's a part of me that wants to live a very healthy life and, and a virtuous life and all of that. And so a first step towards self-awareness to me is recognizing that I have within me multiple selves. And therefore, I have a choice to make as to how I really think about my true self versus my false friends, because there are many false friends in there that get me in trouble. And And so self-awareness to me would include a invitation to also understand the competing impulses that we have and to cut through them, to identify and recognize and then befriend and cultivate our true friends. And one way I like to think of it is I call it your inner core. Um, you know, the truth speaking traditions, they might call it your soul.
Well, you couldn't have possibly scripted a better way to end, because my next question is about the inner core. I'm actually going to read from your book. I'm picking this up from page 13. You write, "What is your true self? I offer that it is your inner core, the space of highest potential within you, your best self. When you operate from your core, you are free from ego, attachments, blinding beliefs, limiting habits, and insecurities. You are at peace with yourself. It reflects the purest part of who you are and your noblest intentions." I love that. So today's show is devoted to self-awareness. How do we come to know our inner core? I know you've kind of alluded to it in an earlier question, but let's do some more justice to this.
Yeah, thank you for honing in on that. It is definitely the central construct in the book. I don't necessarily say it that way overtly, but over time you kind of, a careful reader would probably draw that out as you have. So thank you. In some ways, to me, like this is the most romantic quest in life, the most romantic quest in life, which is to discover your own soul, discover your own purity, your own, hero inside. And the best and most effective pathways towards it that I've over time, stumbled into and studied and in some cases experimented with in my own life. Yogananda's work, for example, has been highly influential, in my path. But the integrative thread across all of these is contemplative practices and the pursuit of mysticism that has so beautifully cut across, all the great faiths. You have, for example, the Kabbalah traditions in Judaism and the Sufi movement in Islam and the desert saints in Christianity. And yeah, yoga, as the core of Hinduism is just all about, these kind of deeper mystical quests and the deep meditative practices in Buddhism. Any or all of those, ultimately come to the same sort of conclusion that the only way to discover the riches that lie within are to engage in a 3 or 4 step process of first living a life that is a little bit sort of tempered, tempered as in you don't sort of indulge in extremes, extreme emotional expression, extreme sensory indulgence, extreme this, extreme that, because that can cause a lot of sort of turmoil and stress and damage and, ultimately not allow you to be prepared for all that beautiful inner journey that you really want to take. So you want to be strengthening yourself by just being a little bit tempered, in your moderated, right, in your everyday sort of ways of life. You don't want to really strongly hate, any community and all that, because then there's a lot of work that you have to do to purify your heart in those moments of meditative, contemplative work. So you do that tempered life thing, and then, as I mentioned in the chapter on, living with self-realization, you go from the tempered state to how do you interiorize your mind now? How do you sort of quieten down the outer din so that you can actually, kind of focus on the inner, kind of on the inner journey, the inner universe, within you. You're like this inner astronaut, catapulting yourself into inner space. So practices like, at the minimum, being able to sit still, practices like, doing some deep breathing, etc., to just start to slow down your process of thought, because the inner stuff is not merely about just the, being in a silent, quiet room and keeping your eyes closed. The inner stuff is also about quietening the din of your emotions and your thoughts, because that too is actually holding you back. It's not your soul. It's not your core. It's this set of like perturbations and disturbances that are happening within your mind. It's when you still them down in the calm, surface of the lake. The moon, as Yogananda would say, can be more perfectly reflected. But when the surface of the lake is very restless in the waters, then the moonlight is just scattered and you don't see the full reflection of the moon. the moon being your soul, in this case. And so interiorization practices also work on stilling your own thoughts and your feelings. And then you want to choose a mental focus as to, okay, now that I'm, harnessing the power of my attention and I'm taking it a little bit away from the, restless engagement with the senses or thoughts, what am I going to, what am I going to direct it to? What am I going to direct it to? And what you want to do is directed towards a quality of your soul. And think about any beautiful quality. It could be beauty, it could be love, it could be wisdom, it could be peace, it could be joy. Those who have trekked that mountaintop of their inner core have reported back that that is what you experience there. That is who you are at the true core of your being. Why not believe in that? Why would you want to believe yourself to be capable of anything less than that, less than infinite, boundless love and wisdom and peace and joy? So you take one of those qualities, or you can at times focus on the visage, the image, of a very inspiring, soul in your life. This could be a loved one, this could be a teacher, a mentor, it could be a prophet, or a guide, and you just kind of visualize their countenance, their face, the love coming from them. So either in that humanized way or in that sort of more abstract, just feeling of love or joy, that's what you want to focus on. And so that's the basic construct, where the ultimate goal is that you ultimately merge with that. You merge with that joy, you merge with that love, you merge with that peace, and you just feel that dissolving of your individual drop into that larger ocean. That's kind of like the ultimate mystical experience. And there are practices and there are methods. In my case, as a student of Yogananda and his self-realization fellowship lessons, I got to learn the practice of Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga is a branch of yoga that, or a technique or a method within the discipline of yoga that has been particularly honed for millennia, for centuries past, in helping us get to accelerate and deepen our journey into the inner core through certain practices around getting to harness and direct prana. Prana is what in China you might call chi, in the martial arts world. And, more broadly, we might use the language of a life force, which is a form of energy that is so subtle that it's not measurable by today's more physical instruments, but is very much what, energizes us and what enlivens us and what ultimately can be harnessed and directed towards helping us experience elevated states of consciousness. And so now we're getting into a little bit more sort of, the kind of practice that I found most helpful. But if I had to draw an integrative thread, it's like these contemplative practices, everything from what Mother Teresa would call silent prayer. She would call it silent prayer. Gandhi would talk about silent prayer as well. Chanting at times, as a way to, again, just fuse with that feeling of love. And affirmations and visualizations are other such practices. In a smaller, more kind of like gentle way, you can, take a walk in nature and just feel that sense of transcendent connection with all the elements of nature and the chirping of that bird there and what have you, or the expansive skies up there. So yeah, any or all of these are ways to get at least glimpses of that amazing special sanctuary that we all have within us. How does that sync with your own practice, Anita, and your own life experience?
Well, that's an intuitive question, because I was going to speak precisely to that. I went in December for my first Vipassana retreat, 10-day silent meditation. So I think if I had heard you say all of what you just said, in theory, I would say, yeah, the contemplative practices, I've kind of dipped into meditation. There was a month some years ago where I woke up at 4 a.m. for 30 days in a row. And so I understand what you're saying. But the 10 days of silent meditation was so difficult and so beautiful. Just that very last day where so along the way, we're in silent meditation, just paying attention to the sensations of our body with the intention of not having any judgment of them, good or bad, and trying not to move so that you could just experience with equanimity the sensation and just live with that, right? And to use that practice to out in the world so that you don't overreact or, that type of thing. On the penultimate day, the meditation turned towards loving kindness. And I had this incredible experience in this room with maybe 60 women, 60 men, just like I lost the feeling of my fingers where they ended. And I knew that they were still there, but I felt like I was like, okay, but where are the cells? Like I'm one with it was just beautiful. I just loved everybody in the room. So I had, it was only 10 days and I haven't really kept up if I have to really admit it, but I do believe that these contemplative practices are real avenues to discovering our inner core. So everything you said resonates.
That was beautiful to hear, and I want to congratulate you for having that adventuresome spirit to take on this kind of a experiment in your life. And it's so beautiful to see how you have to earn your way towards the fulfillment and the breakthroughs you get from these kinds of practices, right? And especially if we have lived a lifetime that is just so much honoring the external material and doing less service to the internal and spiritual, in us, and yet it's so core to who we are. So you start to do this, and at some point you start to realize, my God, like I'm just not going to be able to see the world and see life and see myself ever again in the same way, because I've been somewhere and done something and experienced something that gives me a glimpse of the vast, beautiful, undreamed of, possibilities that lie ahead, right? So beautiful. And I'm cheering you on as you continue to expand into these practices.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's why I was very much looking forward to our conversation. I knew we would be kindred spirits. On page 29 of your book, you actually write, and this is a simple set of words, inner mastery engenders outer impact. And I find that fully aligns with the IDG tagline. They say inner growth for outer change, right? That's
Yeah.
essentially it. So why do you suppose inner mastery, inner growth, inner transformation is so important now, 2025?
It's a great question. I think a few reasons. One is, if you think about the kind of challenges and problems that we are encountering today in society, one way to summarize those for me is that we had built a certain model, a model that is built on the intellectual life, a model that is built on honoring science and technology, a model that is built on, this notion of democracy, of a certain kind as being like the ultimate system of governance, and a model that is built on capitalism, right? And what we're noticing now is the limits of that model. We've come to a place where it's helped us progress in many ways in per capita income and education levels and increasing freedom in the more democratic countries. But we've also realized, like, wow, this freedom is leading to a lot of rancor and conflict and different competing interests, within and belief systems within the same country. So wait a second, now we are fighting so much because we have all this freedom, right? So what does it really mean to give me more independence and autonomy if it's, mental health issues are coming up in a huge and serious way, political factions, of course, geopolitical tensions, environmental issues. So this model has reached, its limit, really, in some ways. So where's the next set of breakthroughs going to come from? If we just keep doing more of the same, just say, no, just introduce two more courses within that sort of just, regime of like cultivating the intellectual life, to me, it's not going to solve anything, because we are needing at this point desperately breakthroughs that allow us to enter new dimensions. As Einstein said once, which many of our listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with, that you cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness, from where you created it. So what's the new level of consciousness? And I think that's where these, internal development goals and the notion of, the inner life of people is going to be central and key. As one example, I think that, with all the, competing interests and, fights that are going on in society today, if we only approach that from the arena of like material advancement being the sacrosanct, most important thing in life, we will see many things as zero-sum games, which is that one community will have to give something up in order for another community to get something, rising in income inequality, tax the rich people even more so that we can actually pass on some of those. And, and meanwhile, the rich people, some of them are thinking, wait a second, I worked so hard for this, or my parents did or something. Why should I just be taxed? So, that's a zero-sum game situation. The only way I found, and I have found much evidence in history of communities coming together, movements happening, nation at the national level, at the local level, etc., where people have risen above this kind of calculus. And that's happened when they have been, in some ways inspired to elevate their consciousness, to elevate their character, by at times some inspiring call, sometimes made by certain leaders or certain inspiring influencers in that moment. Sometimes, one leader iconically has had a lot of role to play in that. Gandhi, for example, certainly supported by so many others, but he was a key force in taking India to that, taking India and United Kingdom to that place. United Kingdom was going to lose something economically by losing its crown jewel in the British Raj, India, as part of its colonial regime. But on the other hand, they were going to gain something morally by doing that. And he was able to convince them that you should go after moral victory, not like economic usurpation of like India's, wealth and all of that. And they at some point signed up for it, so much so that they peacefully exited the nation, peacefully exited without having to be fought with and losing a war, which is kind of how the American Revolution was fought. And so I think that it is so critical for us to achieve breakthroughs, build bridges, bring people together. We need to look for solutions that you and I don't even know what they are yet. And the only way we get there is through creativity and collaboration. Creativity and collaboration has a lot to do with whether you are from the inside approaching situations from a place of love and conciliation and gentility and a sense of possibility, and not a sense of hopelessness about what the climate future of the world is, not from a sense of hatred about the other party and etc. And so the more we can purify and activate our highest internal impulses, the more we are able to expand the collective consciousness and character of our people. And therefore, we'll be more collaborative, we'll be more creative, we won't be really locked into zero-sum games, and new solutions will emerge, the capacity to self-sacrifice will emerge, and collectively, I am confident in the capacity in humanity to overcome any kind of challenge on this planet Earth, and also do it in partnership with this planet. So our hearts will expand where we can be in tune with all of life and nature's ways, rather than just purely think about it like it's about humankind trying to kind of dominate or rule over nature. No, no, no. It's not humankind ruling over nature. It's humankind, recognizing its role to play in this multi-species, beautiful, form of sort of life that exists on planet Earth, and perhaps at some point expand its consciousness to the point where we can also be in, who knows, in touch with life on other planets as well.
Mm, mm. So you mentioned Gandhi and you write about him. In fact, there are a set of chapters where you talk about living and leading with purpose, wisdom, growth, love, and self-realization. And then each of those chapters is paired with another chapter about a luminary. And I have, besides this one, I have two questions to get to before we close the hour. So I want to ask just quickly, how was the experience of writing about such incredible luminaries? I just wonder how it's informed you as a person.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking very probing questions, and I've actually not had the pleasure of really having questions like this in podcasts before, so I really appreciate them. And the question you're asking is actually very, very close to my heart, Anita, because I remember several years ago I was presenting some stories and examples and mentioning how this has been a key source of knowledge and information in my work, which is studying these lives. At that time, I used to call them the great leaders. And I got strong pushback, from some people in the audience who were very cynical about, like, yeah, but this person had that weakness, that person had that weakness, and this theory of great leaders has completely failed us in the world and all of that. And I was a little bit taken aback, but then I went and studied and looked, and sure enough, in the academic literature, there was a period of time where this was very fashionable, and then sort of it actually lost its currency with the experts. And it was a very maturing moment for me. And I'm grateful for that pushback that I received, because, what you don't want to do is, engage in any kind of like, hagiographic sort of approach, right? Where you're like, wow, what a perfect person, and everything about them is perfect, and all of that, right? And then the more I started to pay attention to them as not just beautiful souls on the inside, but also in some ways humble human beings on the outside. To me, it actually made me fall even more in love with them. Their struggles, at times their failures, their own personal, yeah, just questing for becoming a better version of themselves. Moments where they felt they had lost touch with their inner voice and they had to do, just a lot more work to kind of figure out what the right versus the wrong thing was and all of that. So a Gandhi, an Abraham Lincoln, a Nelson Mandela, Eleanor Roosevelt, um, Mother Teresa, Steve Jobs, any or all of these people, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, I just over time I have just fallen so deeply in love with them that now I tell people, look, you have friends in life, yeah, okay. Well, we have an outer circle of friends, but we can also cultivate an inner circle of friends. And the inner circle of friends are people whose lives you take a deep interest in and you study and read everything you can about them. And then you start to actually convene with them, inside your own heart and mind. And every now and then you invoke their presence, you invite them in because you would love to, ask like, okay, if I was, you know, taking a walk with Abraham Lincoln, what would his counsel be to me? How would he, act and react in my situation? And then suddenly a story flashes in your mind that you had picked up at a certain point, and it informs and inspires you to be choosing the right path versus the wrong path today. So yeah, I mean, while I am, honored and delighted to be putting these leaders and my curation and um, my storytelling around the arc, of their impact, their movement, their life into the hearts and minds of our readers. I have to say that in the process, the person who's benefited the most is myself, and it is because I've fallen in love with these people, and they have become, yeah, lifelong inner circle of friends for me.
I love that answer. And one of the notes that I put in the book is, who do I want to study? Who do I want to read about to fall in love with, using your words? So I'm on a quest right now to see who is it that I want to learn more about to inform my way of thinking about the world. Okay.
By the way, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. In particular, I want to say sometimes I ask people, who's like your biggest role model and all that, like who's somebody you really admire, and and there's a percentage of people who say we don't have one. I don't have one. And it's my greatest prayer for them is that, they ultimately find at least one, if not several, at least one, because, you want that confidence and clarity that, yes, humanity is capable of really beautiful paths in life and purpose in life and, expressions of, divine grace in what they do. And, and so when you actually see somebody whose footsteps you would love to walk in, not necessarily to emulate, them in any sort of like superficial and blind way on the outside in terms of their personality, but certainly be inspired by who they were at their core and the kind of energy and spirit that they were able to exude. Um, I'm cheering you on in this yeah, pursuit that you're going to engage in.
And I'll keep you posted. So I want to speak about self-transcendence. All right. On page 282, you write about the 5 principles of mysticism. And one of them I want to read out loud and ask what you think the connection is between self-awareness and self-transcendence. Okay. And something you write is, the purpose of life is to advance our consciousness so it can dissolve into the universal core. Higher consciousness isn't a reward to be earned in an afterlife for having lived virtuously, but a state to cultivate here and now in this life through the instrumentalities of our body and mind with the right techniques and way of living. So the purpose of life is to advance our consciousness. And that's part of self-transcendence. So what is the connection, you think, between this incredible aspirational path to self-transcendence and self-awareness?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question again, and going back to an earlier part of our conversation, if you think about sort of this notion of self-awareness, first requiring us to define what we mean by itself, um, and I had at that point kind of simplified it to just this idea that we have multiple selves, and one of them is our true self, and that's our inner core, and being able to sift, the various impulses and pulls we feel away from that part of who we are, where when we are egoless and beyond insecurities and all of that, we just experience something so beautiful and so special, and that's our true self. Well, the way I was just describing that at that time was as though that was an individualized version of who you are, and that's probably the most natural way for most of us to experience, ourselves and our identity as something distinct and different, from that of other forms of life and other human beings, around us. And that makes sense as a first step. There's a second step though towards the ultimate discovery of our true self, that the mystics inform us and guide us, and that is really part of all mystic traditions, which is this notion of the dissolving of the boundaries, this notion of self-transcendence, this notion that when you truly, truly dive within and open yourself up to this exploration, you thought you were just gonna, getting to go to a certain planet but you realize suddenly that no, you're actually one with the whole universe, with all of creation. Every atom in creation is something that is just very naturally and organically connected to you. And you and your maker, you and the creator, you and the universe were always one. You had just gotten a little bit too identified with that drop that you thought you were. And so it's a abstract and somewhat imposing and bold idea, which for most people, if you only were to engage with it through the agency of words, you'd never really fully be able to experience, what that truly means. But we all had experiences where we felt a certain sense of fusion, a sense of fusion with an activity we were engaged in, a sense of fusion with an individual that we deeply, deeply love, and they may not even be in our physical presence right now, but we feel their energy, we feel in some ways their thoughts, and they're very real to us. Sometimes these people may have even passed on, beyond this life. And sometimes we feel a deep fusion with a group, a team, a nation, a cause. So that sense of transcendence, that sense of dissolving boundaries, that sense of I am more than just purely what is physically resonant in this, limited construct of my body or even my mind. I think intuitively, any or all of us have sensed that and felt that, in those moments. Sometimes in that communion with nature. I was talking about how, as a little boy, I would want to talk to the stars, and I just felt that connection. So yeah. So if you were able to honor those impulses and experiences when you have them, and then seek to find a way to more fully nurture those and expand those, then you get to a sense that wow, like I was never really different or apart from the universe. And as a beautiful French theologian and mystic had once said, he said, you're not, a human being having a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. Or Rumi, he said it beautifully, the Sufi mystic. He said, you're not a drop in the ocean. You realize in that moment, and that's my way of fully, closing the circle on your question about self-awareness and self-transcendence. You realize in that moment, you're not a drop in the ocean, you are the whole ocean in a drop.
I'm so flooded. Oh my gosh, it's so life-affirming to have this conversation. Our last question. I ask this of all my guests. This is a podcast devoted to empathy, and this series is devoted to the IDGs. But the question I ask is, can you think of a time, Hitendra, when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Yeah, wow, that's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And my life has been so blessed. I can point to so many countless occasions, but the one that I will offer for now, which I revisit many times in life, is there was a nun that I knew when I was in that searching space, year 10 of my life, year 11, 12, 13, 14. And she was just this incredibly beautiful presence in my life. When I would spend time with her, I would feel the pouring of just so much love, from in a sense like the creator. In India we like to think of the creator as like a divine mother at times, that has given birth, and is unconditionally loving to everybody in her flock. So this nun was kind of an embodiment of that divine mother to me. And what I would notice is that every time I would spend time with her and I would walk away, I would feel just so special and so good about myself. And that was the magical quality of empathy that she had, that she was not merely, let's say, respecting or recognizing the emotions I might be feeling in that moment, the struggles I might be having in that moment, etc. She was piercing through all of that to recognize the hero that lay within, the very, very special Hitendra that lies at the core of my being, just like there is that special Anita within you and special someone within each of us. And she would respect that, see that, nurture that, encourage that, and I would walk away feeling very connected with that. That was, you can imagine, I mean, it happened, X decades ago, that was 10, 12, 14 that time, and still continues to be a source of tremendous strength and affirmation for me.
Well, the reason I like asking that question is I never know the answer I'll get, but everyone always has a story, and it's always a story that actually I can sense matters to the person sharing the story, which again is a reminder that we all have the opportunity to extend more empathy and turn up the volume of empathy in our lives. And the ripple effect of that is really more powerful than we can possibly imagine. So thank you for sharing. I'm sad our podcast is coming to an end, but I'm grateful for every moment. I hope you will pick up a copy of Inner Mastery and Outer Impact. Thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you too, Anita. This has been a real joy to spend this time with you, and I can only imagine how much your audience gains from every one of the conversations you have and what you spark in people. So very, very grateful. Thank you.
Sweet. We'll see you all next week at Purposeful Empathy.
If you know someone who'd benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Post the link on your socials and hit the subscribe button now. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.